Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome to my channel. First of all, I want to let you know that I also made a review on the Ryzen 7 9700X, and it seems that since I was testing some different games and with an RX 7900 XTX instead of an RTX 4090, I got some different results from other reviewers, and I also have RAM tweaking and overclocking results that will also be featured on this video. Now, as for Zen 5, AMD stated that AMD stated that they improved lots of things over Zen 4, like the AVX 512 on 512-bit data path to increase the throughput. That will help in some games and software that uses AVX 512, like emulators for example, the optimized branch prediction and fetch, and the improved L-cache latency and bandwidth. But after all, what does that mean to the end user? Well, putting this in an easy way, compared to the previous generations, we have the Ryzen 9 9900X delivering the same amount of cores and threads, with around the same die size as Zen 4, slightly less, but with an increase on DDR5 native frequency, going from DDR5 5200 to DDR5 5600 mega transfers per second, although the 9900X comes with a lower base clock, going from 4.7 GHz on the 7900X to 4.4 GHz. Still a lower decrease than with the 9700X, and this happens most likely because of the improved power consumption from 230 to 162 watts, which is also a massive decrease. So simplifying, the Zen 5 is kind of a Zen 4 with better branch prediction and lower latencies, better native DDR5 support, once again from 5200 to 5600, and better efficiency due to TSMC's 4nm process die. And on top of this, the Ryzen 9 9900X also comes at $499 MSRP, which is about $50, $40-50 below the MSRP of the 7900X, which is actually nice. I also have to state that I found AMD's reviewer's guide quite odd, as since the 9900X is a dual CCD processor, meaning it features two packages of cores, AMD advises to use the balanced plan in the control panel alongside the best performance mode in Windows settings, which most times stops using the second CCD. Although I found that to not be optimal for most games, actually leading to a performance decrease in some others, so I just tested with the normal best performance power plan. I'll show some more side-by-side comparisons in the end of the video, don't worry. So better efficiency and lower MSRP. But what about performance? As usual, we start with the productivity benchmarks, this time with Photoshop budget benchmark, which is mostly single-threaded. A thread that will lead to our sponsor, GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. As for the results, we see the Ryzen 9000 series being the fastest CPUs here, and that happens because of the higher single-core performance, and we even see the 7700X being faster than the 7800X 3D, once again due to the higher single-core performance. I wish I had the 7900X to compare with the 9900X, but I don't. Still, it delivers slightly better performance than the 9700X and 12% faster than the 7900X 3D. Oh, and by the way, I advise you to watch the video in full screen as there's a lot of data here. Premiere is a more multi-threaded workload, so we do get the 9900X in the top of the charts once again, being now 6% faster than the 7900X 3D, which is nothing relevant, with even the 9700X and the 7700X performing very well here. As we move to Blender though, things change considerably, with the Ryzen 9 CPUs being much faster due to the higher core count of course, but with the Ryzen 9 9900X being 17% faster than the 7900X 3D, which obviously happens due to the higher IPC, higher frequencies and higher power limits. In Cinebench R24 it is more or less of the same, but now we can actually see the single core results as well, with the 9700X being 14% faster than the 7700X, and the 9900X being 11% faster than the 7900X 3D. Which is honestly not fair, as I believe the difference in between the 7900X and the 9900X would be lower here, as the X3D CPUs like the 7900X 3D feature lower boost frequencies, so yeah. As for 7-zip, we have the Ryzen 9 9900X being up to 9% faster than the 7900X 3D in decompression and 8% in compression. It is interesting to note the huge difference that the tweaked timings, or in this case, the tweaked sub-timings, make regarding compression, delivering a 14% increase with the 9900X and 12% increase with the 7900X 3D. These tweak timings can be seen in the BuildZoids DDR5 tweak video that will be, as always, in the pinned comment. But well, let's now watch the gaming performance. In Assetto Corsa we have the 7800X 3D completely demolishing the competition, being 19% faster than the 9700X and 25% faster than the 9900X. That in here is also slightly slower than the 7900X 3D. This is a game that is quite fun to test as it loves cache of course, but hates dual CCD solutions due to latency I guess, hence the results we see. Solid win for the 7800X 3D in this game. As we move to Modern Warfare 2, things change slightly, especially since some of the most powerful CPUs here were being GPU bottlenecked in some parts of the benchmark, even at 1080p balanced with an RX 7900X TX. Still, the 9900X appears to be slightly slower than the 9700X, that is also quite close to both the 7900X 3D and the 7800X 3D. And of course with the 5800X 3D putting the 7700X to shame in this title, being 11% faster. Counter-Strike 2 is another one of those games that likes the extra cache, but dislikes dual CCD configurations even more. But since it is memory sensitive, it also likes lower latencies and higher frequencies, which is why we see the 9900X being 3% faster than the 7900X 3D with tweaked timings. Although both are considerably slower than the 9700X here, that is actually faster than the 7800X 3D as soon as we do RAM tweaking, which in this case is really easy to do. Once again, lay an eye on the pinned comment. Hogwarts Legacy is another game that really surprised me, with the 7800X 3D being 23% faster than the 7700X and only slightly faster than the 9700X, which seems more or less on par with what we see with the 9900X versus the 7900X 3D, where the previous is slightly slower, with also considerably lower 1% lows, which I mean is expected from a dual CCD CPU with no 3D cache, I guess. And the same applies to Microsoft Flight Simulator, where the Ryzen 9 9900X is once again slower than the 7900X 3D. But we do need to consider that this game is like Assetto Corsa, it simply loves cache, hence why the 7800X 3D is 33% faster than the 7700X and 21% faster than the 9700X. And considering these differences, well, seeing the 7900X 3D being only 11% faster than the 9900X is not that bad. Banishers Ghosts of New Eden is another very CPU dependent title, at least in the village areas, as we're talking about Unreal Engine 5, that sometimes is unrealistically heavy. As for the results, we have X3D CPUs dominating here, which is nothing new, but it does seem this game works well with the dual CCD CPUs, as the Ryzen 9 7900X 3D is only a bit slower than the 7800X 3D, and the 9900X is slightly faster than the 9700X, with that same 9700X being 12% faster than the 7700X. As we move to Hitman 3, we move to another game that's pretty CPU intensive and cares a lot about cache, as the 7800X 3D is 24% faster than the 7700X and 18% faster than the 9700X. Although it seems that once again the dual CCD solutions aren't a thing that this game likes a lot, with the 7900X 3D barely outmatching the 9700X, and with the 9900X outmatching the 7900X 3D by like 5% with tweaked timings, which once again is not much, but is something I guess. As we move to Starfield, well, this game is really odd in terms of CPU benchmarking. We have the 7900X 3D working decently well, as it is a dual CCD CPU, but also has 3D cache, with the 7800X 3D being only slightly faster. but in some parts of the benchmark it was getting GPU bottlenecks, but I mean only in a few instances. And as for the 9900X, oh boy, it is even slower than the 5800X 3D, which is insane. But I mean, these results are really new. I tested all these CPUs in Starfield recently, like some days ago, and man, these are what they are. And once again, the 9900X is slower than the 5800X 3D here. The Last of Us, on the other hand, shows more realistic results, with the Ryzen 7 9700X matching the 7800X 3D, actually surpassing it in the 1% lows, and the 9900X being slightly faster than the 7900X 3D as well, which is always good to see. Still, in this game, the dual CCD configurations aren't the best performers, I mean, with the 9700X and the 7800X 3D taking the top spots. Something that changes a bit with Far Cry 6, where the 9700X loses some ground and the 9900X is now the third fastest CPU here, first one if we don't include the X3D chips. And this is why I wanted to have the 7900X to test as well, but I guess I'll leave that one for the later benchmarks. Still, very decent results for the dual CCD CPUs here. CPUs that get bumped up in Spider-Man, the first game that makes proper use of the dual CCD configurations, with the Ryzen 9 9900X virtually matching the 7800X 3D in terms of averages and surpassing it in terms of 1% lows. I mean, it even surpasses the 7900X 3D that has the benefit of the 3D cache, which is awesome to see. And as we enable ray tracing, the game gets more bandwidth dependent, and in that case scenario the dual CCD configurations benefit a lot, with the Ryzen 9 7900X 3D being 8% faster than the 7800X 3D, and the 9900X being the fastest CPU here, being also 4% faster than the 7900X 3D, without any kind of CPU tweaking applied. So imagine if we had a 9900X 3D here, it would perform crazy fast. And to finalize, we have Total War Warhammer 3 with a battle benchmark. This game is actually way less CPU dependent than I thought when I started testing CPUs with it, with all CPUs reaching around the same performance on average, all within the margin of error, with the only difference being in the 1% lows, where the 7800X 3D is dominating by a little, followed by almost every single CPU that delivers at least 160 FPS there. As you saw, the Ryzen 9 9900X's performance is far from bad, in some cases being really close to the previous generation X3D CPUs, and in some cases being even faster than the 7800X 3D, like in Marvel's Spider-Man. But what about overclocking? Because as you saw, the Ryzen 9 9900X comes with a considerably lower TDP and PPT compared to the Ryzen 9 7900X. So what will happen if we actually open the power locks and let it boost to the moon? Starting with 7-zip, unlike with CPUs like the 9700X, the overclocking barely affected the compression performance, but it did increase the decompression one by 6%. From a little over 200,000 points to 213,000, which is always welcomed. And by the way, the black bars are the only ones with the overclocked results, just for you to know. As for Blender, the difference is more pronounced, with the overclocking on the Ryzen 9 9900X delivering a 9% uplift, making the 9900X up to 27% faster than the 7900X 3D in Blender open data. Cinebench R24 also shows an improvement, with only 3% in single-core performance due to the higher boost frequencies of course, but with a 7% increase in terms of multi-threading, making the 9900X up to 23% faster than the 7900X 3D and 52% faster than the 9700X. Microsoft Flight Simulator also benefited from overclocking with all CPUs, with both the 9700X and 9900X gaining around 10 average FPS, but with the 9700X delivering higher 1% lows. In this game, the overclock made these chips closer to the 7800X 3D results for sure, but still far away from the almost 200 average FPS it gives. The Last of Us is a different scenario though, where the overclocking does help a bit, but only for the 9700X. If we're talking about the 9900X, we got 1 FPS increase, in the averages, which counts as margin of error. In this game, the Ryzen 7's 9700X surpasses the 7800X 3D and is the fastest CPU here. And as stated before, Starfield is kind of a mess, especially with the Ryzen 9 CPU, since they feature dual CCD configurations, with it delivering only 94% of the 7900X 3D's performance, even overclocked, with the Ryzen 7 7700X being one of the fastest CPUs here, somehow. But Spider-Man, on the other hand, takes advantage of the Ryzen 9 CPU's layout and puts the 9900X as the best performer, being now 6% faster than the 7900X 3D and 3% faster than the 7800X 3D. But as soon as we activate ray tracing, things get way more interesting, with the Ryzen 9 9900X now being 8% faster than the 7900X 3D and 17% faster than the 7800X 3D, which is kind of a feat. I would like to see more games making use of the dual CCD design like Spider-Man and some others of course, as we could finally start seeing some really decent advantage for people that are getting top tier CPUs for gaming. As for the averages, our base results will be the stock Ryzen 9 7900X 3D, which is faster than the full stock 9900X in gaming, as expected, but with a little tweaking the 9900X can be up to 4.4% faster than the last generation X3D CPU, which is a better result than what we got for the 9700X, for example, that is slower than the 7800X 3D in virtually any gaming scenario. If the 9900X can be up to 4% faster than the 7900X 3D, I believe it will be around 10 to 15% faster than the normal 7900X in gaming, which doesn't seem that bad considering the lower MSRP, and of course the lower power consumption as well. And by the way, if you want to take a look at the lower end CPU's averages, you have them here as well. And to finalize, we have the power draw, and this time I am showing you a small number of CPUs in order to be easier to understand the results. As I stated in my previous video, focus more on the numbers and less on the bar sizes, as Excel insists in doing a sum of at least 2x's, so the final size does not reflect the numbers sometimes, so yeah. Once again, as for the power draw, we can see that in terms of idle and single core, the 9900X actually performs pretty much on par with the 7900X 3D that was already much more efficient than the 7900X, which is very good considering the higher single core performance as well. But as soon as we unlock the power limits, things get nuts and the 9900X can go as high as 212 watts in multi-core workloads, even using Curve Optimizer at -25. Even if we look at the stock power consumption, we can see that it pulls around 162 watts, which is honestly not much. It seems to be quite higher because we don't have the 7900X here, otherwise the 9900X would show itself to be faster and more power efficient than the older 7900X, which is a good overall improvement. But once again, it is what it is. As you saw, overclocking the Ryzen 9 9900X did help the performance in some titles, making it actually a very good contender for people, or at least a very good option for people building new computers right now, especially if they're using a lot of productivity tasks like editing, compressing, rendering, so on. And the 9900X is in a much better position than the 9700X, and I say this because compared to the 7900X 3D, it is much better in productivity, even better if you overclock it of course, and it is actually overall better in the gaming performance department as well. This all for $40 more, which is kind of acceptable in my book, compared to the 9700X and 7700X, where the 9700X is of course faster, but it is also more expensive than the 7800X 3D that is considerably faster in gaming. So yeah, and considering the 9900X is faster in productivity and slightly faster in gaming, for $40 more it seems like a decent option, especially since it will have lower power consumption compared to the 7900X as well. So if you're looking purely for a gaming processor, I couldn't advise you anything but the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D of course, but if you're looking for something that performs extremely well in the productivity server workloads while having a good gaming performance, then the Ryzen 9 9900X might be what you're looking for. And remember what I told you about the power plans, the recommended AMD power plans in their reviewer's guide, where they recommend you to use the, on the control panel power plan, they recommend you to use the balanced mode and then select the high performance mode on the Windows settings, on the new Windows settings. Well, Counter-Strike 2 is kind of latency sensitive, and I believe this is why the AMD's recommended power plan delivered around 10 average FPS more, that translated in 2.5% better performance. But honestly, it didn't affect the gameplay by any means, and the only upside was the slightly lower power draw, which once again doesn't mean much. Although as we move to Far Cry 6, things are quite different, with the all-CCD configuration leading to a 7% increase in performance, and it seems that having basically 6 cores 12 threads running this game isn't quite optimal, and the game prefers the added latency of dual CCDs compared to the lack of cores and cache. As for Flight Simulator, the differences were once again small, but the normal performance did get around 1% more average performance or more FPS, which is not relevant of course, but the 1% lows are, where the normal performance mode delivers up to 7% more FPS if we compare the maximum 118 versus the minimum 110 on the recommended power plans. So as you can see, if I tested with the settings that AMD recommended on the AMD's reviewer's guide, I would actually be having lower performance in the most games that I tested. Some games like Counter-Strike 2 and others have a slight increase, let's say 3-4% performance increase, 5% at most, but those that have 5% are really small, a small margin of the overall picture. But as soon as I enable the high performance mode, most games will have 7-10% performance increase compared to the settings that AMD recommend on dual CCD CPUs like the 9900X. I believe that if we're talking about the 7900X 3D, maybe we have a higher performance or we have a bigger performance increase because we have the 3D cache on the first CCD. That may make the difference, and I believe once again just because of the 3D cache. But in general, CPUs without 3D cache like the 9900X, you're just better with the high performance mode because overall it will consume a bit more power, but of course will perform considerably better as well. So to finalize this video guys, it all comes to what you want and what you need. Once again, if you're aiming for a CPU that performs extremely well in terms of multi-threading performance and consumes less power than the 7900X, then you want the 9900X because it performs slightly better than the 7900X 3D in terms of general gaming, of course, sometimes a bit less, sometimes a bit more, hence generally slightly better, but in terms of productivity it is much better and it costs only $40 above the 7900X 3D, so it is a very good deal in my opinion if you're looking mostly for productivity benchmarks. If you're looking for a mid-term in between those, well of course once again you can get the 7900X 3D, which still performs very decently in terms of productivity and will perform very well in terms of gaming while having a lower power consumption. And well guys, hope you enjoyed the video, thank you very much for watching, don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video as that really helps a lot. And thanks AMD for sending the 9900X, by the way, to review. This is the second CPU that I get before the release date, which is actually pretty nice. Thank you very much, and guys, see you in the next video. Yeah, leave a comment in the comment section and let me know what you think about the performance of the 9900X, that in my opinion is a much better value than the 9700X. Cheers.